So UFC 300 is finished, and we are going to try and get to the bottom of in today's video why Bo Nickal is on the main card fighting Cody Brundage while you've got fights like Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic and Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling on the prelims. Aljo's on the pound for pound list. And Bo Nickal is taking up a main card spot instead of him. I kind of respect how disrespectful the UFC's being. Then, we're going to talk about how it compares to UFC 299. And we're going to go through the cards next to each other because there was a lot of talk about 299 being the card of the year. But I think UFC 300 might be more stacked top to bottom. I'll be honest with you guys. This is an amazing card. And then we're going to talk about Cody Brundage versus Bo Nickal. I'm going to increase the size of this by the time this part of the video comes around. But we're going to be talking about Cody Brundage, Bo Nickal as a matchup. Who I would have matched Bo Nickal up with instead if they do want to start putting him on the main card of pay-per-views. You have to have a main card of a pay-per-view worthy opponent. And the recent addition of Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano to finish off the card. Let's start with talking about UFC 300. Absolutely stacked card. Stacked beyond belief. Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Amazing main event. Was it the main event we were being promised? No, it's not. But you know what I'm going to start doing? Forget what that dumb, fat, bald fuck Dana White says. He's lying majority of the time. He told us it was going to blow us away. We've never seen anything like this. This is McGregor level. And we listened, and we were wrong to listen. He was talking a whole bunch of nonsense, just yapping, as far as I'm concerned. So, UFC 300's looking pretty good. Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill, Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan, Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway, Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage, Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan, Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic, Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. Now, did you guys notice, before I list the rest of these fights that are on this card, a slight tone? Let me just go through that again. This roster of fights. Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan. Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. And Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. I said all of those fights the same way. I gave every single name of those fights and read out all of those fights with the same level of enthusiasm every single time. But for some reason, it sounded weird when the Bo Nickal fight came up. It just don't fit in with that massive roster of amazing fights. I get why they're doing it. They want to build up Bo Nickal. And I want to talk to you in today's video about why Bo Nickal actually does sell more pay-per-views than we think he does. And I'll get to that because I think Bo Nickal arguably has maybe the best fan base for buying pay-per-views. In all honesty, certain people like O'Malley and Israel Adesanya, they have fan bases that are going to make their tweet blow up or, make their Instagram page get a bunch of likes or make their TikTok get viral amounts of views. But Bo Nickal, his fan base are going to buy the pay-per-view, okay? But look at this card though, man, and compare it to UFC 300. Alex Pereira, Jamal Hill. I mean, I guess we're comparing that with O'Malley versus Vera too. I would give the edge to O'Malley versus Vera. But they're very close to each other in terms of how hype I am for each of those fights. You know what I mean? They're very close. They're very, very hyped fights. Zhang Weili, Yan Xiaonan. There's always one got to spoil the party. That don't compare with Poirier Saint Denis. But I think it's more fair to compare that with, let's say, a Michael Venom Page, Kevin Holland on this main card. You got Dustin Poirier, Benoit Saint Denis. The UFC 300 equivalent is Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. I think that's a better fight. I think that clears it. Easy. You got Bo Nickal, Cody Brundage, which does let down the card. But you got Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan, which I think is more than enough, more than Jack Della Maddalena, Gilbert Burns, and Peter Yan versus Song Yadong. And the Oliveira Tsarukyan fight is an amazing fight. But I'd say overall on the main card, UFC 299 has the more star-studded main card. But the prelims of both, I mean, it's close. This card is close, but the prelims of both was, we're getting both of these cards back to back. Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. Amazing. Curtis Blades versus Gelton Almeida. Similar fights for their respective divisions. A boring loser that nobody wants to win, and then your hero against that boredom, which is Curtis Blades and Yuri Prohaska. Of course, they themselves have varying levels of entertainment value. Calvin Kattar, Aljamain Sterling, I guess, is being compared with Mateus Gamrot versus RDA. I'm more hyped for Kattar versus Sterling. You got Holly Holm, Kayla Harrison, Sadiq Yusuf, Diego Lopez. You know, we're getting to Kyler Phillips, Pedro Munoz. I mean, they're very similar level cards. And, you know, I'd say the women's fights on UFC 300 are better than the women's fights that are on UFC 299. And the men's fights, I mean, look at the early prelims here. Jalen Turner, let me get to it. Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano's on the card. Early prelims this is. Jalen Turner, Renato Moicano, Andrade versus Rodriguez, Bobby Green, Jim Miller, and Figueiredo versus Garbrandt to open up the card. Compare that with UFC 299's early prelims. It's night and day. You know, the female fight is Andrade versus Rodriguez. This one's Wood versus Moroz. And you've got Almabayev Vergara, Despain, Parisian, Pereira, Alexeychuk. Figueiredo, Garbrandt, Green, Miller, Andrade, Rodriguez, and Turner Moicano. I mean, come on. In terms of prelims, UFC 300 clears UFC 299. And if it had a bit better of a layout of a card, like 299 does, it may have a better main card as well. Like, let's say instead of Bo Nickal being on the main card, it was Aljamain Sterling, Calvin Kattar. Dude, UFC 300 is one of the best cards I've ever seen. And I'm glad we put pressure on them. I just wish they wouldn't have put certain fights on the card that they did, because I think it could have been even better. But overall, what we've got in the end of the day, if it weren't UFC 300, this would be like being called one of the greatest cards of all time. Stacked top to bottom, great early prelim fights. Let's talk about Bo Nickal being on the main card, though. He's fighting Cody Brundage. The reason why he shouldn't be on the main card is because Cody Brundage should not be on the main card. And that's my main takeaway from this. Cody Brundage does not belong anywhere near a main card of a pay-per-view. He is not main card level. I think his record's something like 8-6, 8-5. He's not a main card level fighter. And that's why I disagree with Bo Nickal being on the main card. Now, if Bo Nickal were to face off against an Ikram Aliskerov, a Shara Magomedov, an Andre Muniz. The Andre Muniz one is a little bit of a push. He's not that big of a name. He's not got too much hype around him. But at least he's someone that people respect in MMA as a capable grappler, so that if Bo Nickal wins, he can get the respect of, wow, you beat a guy that's actually a very capable grappler that submitted Jacare Souza that like Brendan Allen couldn't submit. Or like if he finishes an Andre Muniz, it's like, okay, this guy's good. Brendan Allen did submit him, by the way, but he took until the third round. If Bo Nickal steamrolls Andre Muniz, it'll give him some credit and value in the middleweight division. But Cody Brundage, like, they couldn't have found a worse opponent. And this is the annoying part. I know Bo Nickal's young, and maybe his next fight is going to be his test, which I think we've been saying quite a bit. But so far, we've got Jamie Pickett, who was literally the bottom of the barrel at middleweight. Even Eric Anders beats Jamie Pickett, you know, like it just. And then his next fight was against Val Woodburn. I know you're supposed to fight someone else, but it wasn't the best opponent anyway. I think it was Trayshawn Gore, who again was bottom of the barrel at middleweight. And then you get Val Woodburn, you win, whatever. Then we take time off, and I'm like, okay, the time off means when he comes back, he's at least getting Meerschaert. And that was me being like, they're probably still going to hold him back, but at least it will be Meerschaert or someone. They give him Cody Brundage. I don't mind Bo Nickal being on the main card, and the reason why I don't is because Bo Nickal has the most fan base per pay-per-view buy maybe out of any fighter in the UFC. Bo Nickal's fan base is the wrestling fan base in America, and the wrestling fan base in America is Chael Sonnen without the UFC and MMA fighting credentials. That's the wrestling fan base in America. It's a middle-aged, middle class or richer white guy, okay, with his family, and he's got kids that also wrestle, and his family's been doing this routine of they grow up and then their kids wrestle, and then they meet, and then, you know, they grow up and then their kids wrestle, and then you go into their nice suburban home, and, you know what I mean? That's sort of the trend that we see in the wrestling community in terms of who's watching wrestling. So who knows of Bo Nickal before the MMA world knows of him? And that fan base is extremely likely to buy pay-per-views. That's why the UFC's doing this. That's why they're going so hard and forcing Bo Nickal on the public pretty much. Like, we haven't seen a Bo Nickal clip and gone, oh my God, that guy's hilarious. What a star. I can't wait to follow this guy. We've seen great performances, and those performances likely will continue if he keeps getting quality opponents that are the quality of Cody Brundage, let's just say. So I'm hyped for Bo Nickal. I think it is because he has that fan base that are very likely to buy a pay-per-view. I mean, who are the people that are buying pay-per-views? I've always wondered. I do it, but I've never imagined anyone else who doesn't have a reason to have great quality streaming to, like, not just illegally stream it. And I think it is that Bo Nickal fan base, that middle class, white American guy with his family that's going to bring all his college mates over that he wrestled with, and it's Bo Nickal time. In the UFC, you know, they buy the pay-per-view, they have a little family gathering with peanuts on the counter in the center and little snacks and Pringles and stuff like that. Like, that's what it's going to be. So I think Dana White knows that, the UFC know that, and they're trying to get Bo Nickal to bring that market to where, you know, I don't think there's going to be a guy who's into wrestling and actively watches wrestling go on, despite not wrestling himself, that's going to be like, I'll illegally stream it. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. I think that's why they're doing it. That's the market they're looking for. That's the type of audience member that they think Bo Nickal has. And I agree. Bo Nickal does have that Joe Rogan audience type vibe. The type of dude in America that would watch Jocko Willink. And that type of... That's who he is. You know what I mean? The Cam Hanes fans, the David Goggins fans, those middle-aged guys. And I think that's who Bo Nickal can speak to, and maybe that's why they put him on the main card. Also, just to give him the spotlight. But I do think that Cater versus Sterling being on the main card just looks better on a poster and makes the card seem like more of a big deal, because, let's be honest, you're already hogging a spot of uselessness with Zhang versus Yan Xiaonan. You can't do another one of Bo Nickal, Cody Brundage, although not useless to the pay-per-view. And obviously the belt of this women's strawweight fight does add a lot of value to it. In terms of blockbuster names on a poster, I mean, I saw some edits of like 2 rows of Spartan Warriors, and it's like Pereira on one side with Zhang, Gaethje, Bo Nickal, and Oliveira, and then there's on the other side Jamal Hill, Yan Xiaonan, Max Holloway, Armand Sarukian. And I actually think that the women's fighters weren't on there, but Yuri and Rakic were on there. And then there's just Brundage at the end, and it just don't feel right, okay? So that's why I had a problem with him being on the main card. Other than that, these are the fights I want to see him go up against, man. Ikram Aliskerov, Sharam Magomedov. If he ragdolls a Dagestani and submits them, he will be a superstar. And everyone knows that. Everyone who pays attention to MMA knows that's the reality. It's not about how good he looks against Cody Brundage. We don't care. Albert Duraev is a Dagestani guy in the UFC. If Brundage takes a fight against one of these guys with one of these types of names, it don't even have to be Ikram or Shara. Which, by the way, I think he could beat Sharam Magomedov after watching Bruno Silva ragdoll him for 3 rounds. I know he won the fight on damage off of his back, and Bruno Silva did nothing on top, but that takedown defense did not look good. So if I was Bo Nickal, I'd be looking at this matchup next. This is where I want to see Bo Nickal go next. I want to see him take on Ikram Aliskerov or Sharam Magomedov. Those are the hyped matchups. Can you imagine then? You literally get the ultimate test of collegiate wrestling in the US versus these guys' style in the East, in Russia, in Sambo. That's what I want to see. Maybe not with Shara because he isn't known for his wrestling, but a guy like Ikram is the guy who stuffed Chimaev's takedowns, even though he got KO'd afterwards. He stuffed Chimaev's takedowns. He stuffed all 3 of them in round 1, and that is impressive. So if Bo Nickal ragdolls him, then there's hype. So I'd say I'd love to see him versus Ikram Aliskerov. That's the matchup to make if he does win this one. And I hope they start pushing Bo Nickal along, because I get what they're doing. I see his record. He's 5-0. This time he'll be 6-0. So I get they're trying to just give him some experience before they chuck him to the wolves at middleweight. But yeah, after this one, it's got to stop. If they're going to have him on main cut, like, I would understand this if they're like, okay, we'd give him Bo Nickal, Cody Brundage, but we're going to put him on the prelims. We're going to build him up. But like, this is crazy to me. Like, to not have Cater and Sterling on the main card and instead on the prelims because Bo Nickal's busy fighting Cody Brundage up there. That's insane to me. You have to justify having him on the main card by giving him a main card quality opponent, which is Ikram Aliskerov or it's Sharam Magomedov. Capiche? Either way, This got added as well. Jalen Turner, Renato Moicano to finish off the card. I like this matchup. I really enjoy this matchup. I think it's a terrible matchup for Renato Moicano. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I know Moicano is going to be furiously angry at me with that, like I always pick against him or something, but I wonder what Moicano was hearing, because I wanted the Paddy Pimblett fight. That was the fight. Moicano Pimblett was the fight. Maybe Moicano's management is telling him, you know, they have more information. Paddy Pimblett doesn't want to fight Moicano. He's got other plans to fight someone else already that's in the works. Or maybe Moicano just didn't want to wait until July, because that's when Pimblett said he was going to return, was around July, and that's going to be on the card in the UK. So maybe Moicano was just like, listen, I'm getting old. I'm not going to wait around forever. I'm ready to go in April, and I'm healthy without injuries. I'm ready to go in April now. I don't think this matchup is guaranteed loss for Moicano. Jalen Turner's a tall, rangy guy. I could see Moicano potentially shooting a takedown, and instead of doing what Gamrot does and just sort of sitting on the hips and trying to grind people down to the canvas and break away their frame and eventually flatten them out and not do too much damage, maybe Moicano would be the type of guy to go for the back take. What's his name? Gamrot doesn't do that. So if Moicano can get to the takedown, get to the hips, and then scoot round to the back and maybe get some hooks in, Jalen Turner's the body type that's sort of made to be climbed and taken the back of. You know what I mean? So that sounds weird, but Moicano's maybe got the style to do it, but I just don't like the style matchup. Jalen Turner's massive for the lightweight division. Crazy long range. I hope Moicano's stand-up's looking a bit crispier than it was against Dober. I know he had a lot of time off, so maybe that was what it was, but I'm worried about the stand-up exchanges here early on, because Jalen Turner's dangerous, dude, and he can find your chin at a crazy good range. Jalen Turner is basically Kevin Holland if he actually had the cojones to actually focus on his fucking job and try and win. You know what I mean? He's like the Kevin Holland that isn't scared to find out if he's good enough or not. And that's a dangerous combo. So I think Jalen Turner edges this. I'm still not convinced of that. I want to watch back some Jalen Turner fights where he got taken down. I know Matt Frivola was taking him down. So I want to see if I can tell if he's made takedown defense improvements since then. Because the Gamrot fight was tricky for him. He was supposed to fight someone else. Gamrot stepped up on short notice, and it's a completely different style matchup for him. So it'd be interesting to see how he does defending takedowns when he has a full training camp of wrestling defense. I just think it's a tricky matchup for Moicano, and I wouldn't, if I was Moicano's team, this would be one fight I would just try and avoid. It'd be this fight. So yeah, looking forward to UFC 300, one of the best cards ever. And Bo Nickal, we got to up the level of competition. Goodbye, Toodle Pip.